A woman betrays her family with gossip, but her lies destroy her marriage. Every family has its quiet center of trust, but in this one, hidden envy was stirring. Marissa, the sister-in-law who had always presented herself as a loyal ally, concealed emotions that festered beneath her practiced smile. She watched her brother's wife, Clara, admired for her grace and kindness, and felt a sting of bitterness that only grew sharper with time. Instead of celebrating her sister-in-law's happiness, she let comparison become poison. The jealousy that simmered silently in her chest became the seed of betrayal. Outwardly, she laughed with the family, hugged the children, and shared meals at the same table. Inwardly, she plotted with dangerous curiosity what would happen if whispers turned to storms. Marissa knew gossip was a powerful weapon. She started small, planting doubts in her husband Adrian's mind about Clara's loyalty and intentions. She hinted at secrets that didn't exist, carefully choosing her words to sound concerned rather than malicious. At first, Adrian dismissed her comments, but repetition is a master manipulator. The more she spoke, the more he questioned. Clara noticed the sudden tension in family dinners, the cold stares, the uncomfortable silence, but she couldn't trace it back to the source. The bond that once tied everyone together began to fray, all because of Marissa's relentless whispers. What begins in daylight can take on darker forms at night. Marissa's gossip became bolder, her tone sharper and her lies more twisted. She told stories of Clara's supposed unfaithfulness, of imagined insults Clara had spread about the family. Each lie spread like fire in dry grass, consuming trust faster than anyone could notice. Adrian, though torn between reason and suspicion, began to withdraw from his wife. Clara, sensing her world shifting but unable to name the cause, grew restless and anxious. Marissa, watching from the shadows, felt a strange thrill in the chaos she was creating. Soon, the once warm gatherings turned into tense confrontations. Clara, bewildered by her husband's distance, tried to seek comfort in her sister-in-law, unaware she was the architect of her misery. Marissa offered false sympathy, using each conversation to dig deeper wounds. Gossip leapt from one ear to another. Neighbors, friends, and even extended relatives began hearing distorted tales. What was once an admired household became the subject of rumors in the community. The family name began to lose its shine, and Clara stood helpless at the center of it all. Adrian's love for Clara was genuine, but poison seeps into even the purest heart if poured long enough. He began to question her late returns from errands, her private conversations on the phone, even her gentle silences at night. Doubt hardened into mistrust, and mistrust into anger. Clara, sensing the weight of his suspicion, tried to defend herself, but her protests only sounded like excuses to his poisoned ears. Marissa, standing quietly at the edge of every argument, pretended to offer advice, while smiling inwardly at how deeply her lies had taken root. Clara felt the walls of her home closing in on her. She could not understand why Adrian, once her most trusted confidant, now looked at her with suspicion in his eyes. She replayed every word, every gesture, and every moment, searching for the source of his sudden coldness. Her attempts to reach out were met with half-hearted replies and dismissive nods. In her desperation, she leaned more on Marissa, believing her sister-in-law's false sympathy was genuine comfort. Marissa, skillfully hiding her glee, urged Clara to be more open with Adrian, knowing full well that each conversation would be twisted later to fit her narrative. Clara endured the pain in silence, her heart heavy, unaware she was confiding in the very hand that sharpened the knife aimed at her. Whispers rarely stay inside walls. Marissa's tales soon trickled beyond the family circle, slipping into the ears of neighbors and acquaintances. A sideways glance at the market hushed conversations that stopped when Clara entered a room. All these signs began to suffocate her. She realized people were looking at her differently, as though they knew something shameful. The once proud woman, admired for her kindness, now carried invisible stains no washing could remove. Adrian, too, noticed the subtle changes in how others treated him, which only reinforced his doubts. He wondered if the entire community knew truths that he was too blind to see. Marissa, watching from behind the veil of innocence, reveled in the way her lies had taken root, growing branches stronger than Clara could ever cut down. Love turned brittle inside Adrian's heart. Once a man of warmth, he now snapped at Clara with sharp words. He accused her of dishonesty, though she swore on everything she held dear that she had done nothing wrong. He began spending longer hours away from home, returning with icy silence or bursts of anger. Clara, shattered by the constant accusations, wept alone in her room, clutching the pillow to silence her cries. Marissa, pretending to be the shoulder she could lean on, whispered venom even as she wiped Clara's tears. "Sometimes men stray when they don't feel respected," she said softly, planting new doubts while feeding Adrian the opposite, claims that Clara was the one betraying. Adrian's heart grew colder by the day, and Clara's world grew darker. But envy rarely hides forever. Marissa's eagerness to gossip began to slip through cracks in her mask of kindness. A cousin overheard her twisting Clara's words in one conversation and noticed the inconsistencies. Rumors about Marissa's meddling began to circulate, faint but persistent. Clara, still blind to the truth, continued to seek solace in her sister-in-law. Yet Adrian occasionally caught fleeting expressions on Marissa's face, smirks too sharp, silences too calculated, that made him uneasy. Doubt shifted slightly from Clara toward the one he trusted too much. Though Marissa was skilled at denial, her own greed for control pushed her into reckless slips. The seeds of her downfall had unknowingly begun to sprout. By now, Clara and Adrian's marriage was a fragile shell of what it once was. Nights passed in cold silence, meals eaten without joy, and days filled with unspoken accusations. Clara's heart was breaking under the weight of a crime she never committed. Adrian, torn between love and suspicion, drifted further into resentment. The children, though young, felt the tension and grew quieter, sensing the storm that never seemed to end. Marissa's lies had nearly achieved their goal, destroying Clara's bond with her husband. Yet in her obsession, she overlooked the danger of weaving webs too tight. For lies, no matter how carefully spun, always carry the risk of tangling their creator. And soon, Marissa would learn that truth has a way of clawing back to the surface, no matter how deep it's buried. Adrian had always trusted his sister, but something inside him began to stir with unease. Marissa's stories grew too detailed, too convenient, as though she were rehearsing them. One evening, after another heated argument with Clara, he lay awake replaying Marissa's words. They no longer sounded like warnings, they sounded like traps. Clara's tears were too raw, her pleas too desperate to be the work of deception. Adrian's heart wrestled with itself. Was he punishing the wrong person? The seeds of suspicion that Marissa had planted began to take root against her. For the first time, Adrian realized he had never questioned why his sister was so eager to speak against Clara. A voice inside whispered, what if jealousy, not truth, had been guiding her? One afternoon, Clara was approached by a cousin who could no longer watch her suffer in silence. The cousin confessed to overhearing Marissa twisting words, inventing stories, and encouraging Adrian's mistrust. Clara was stunned. Her heart struggled to accept that the very person she trusted most in her pain was the one orchestrating her misery. Shock quickly turned into resolve. For weeks she had been drowning in accusations with no way to prove her innocence, but now she had a thread of truth to hold on to. With her cousin's support, Clara decided she would gather more evidence, not to humiliate Marissa, but to finally show Adrian the reality. Marissa's greed for power blinded her to the shifting ground beneath her feet. Believing she had complete control, she continued spreading her poisonous whispers. But lies are fragile, they need constant tending. One day she told Adrian that Clara had secretly met someone at the market. Hours later, another family member casually mentioned that Clara had been with her the entire time buying supplies. Adrian froze. For the first time, Marissa's carefully crafted tale collapsed against a simple truth. He brushed it off in the moment, but his mind replayed the contradiction all night. Doubt, sharp and gnawing, crept into his loyalty toward Marissa. No longer content to accept words without proof, Adrian decided to watch for himself. He quietly began observing Clara's actions, her errands, her conversations, her behavior at home. What he saw was not betrayal, but a woman exhausted, broken, and desperately trying to hold her family together. Clara's prayers at night whispered into her pillow, pierced him like knives. She pleaded for strength for her marriage, for Adrian to trust her again. The sincerity of her pain was undeniable. At the same time, Marissa grew nervous at Adrian's silence. She noticed him asking fewer questions, watching her more closely, and responding to her gossip with distracted nods rather than outrage. The cracks in her control widened. The tension reached its peak when Adrian finally confronted Clara directly, but this time with softer words. He admitted his confusion, his doubts, and the conflict in his heart. Clara, with tears streaming down her face, told him of Marissa's manipulations, backed by her cousin's account. For a moment, Adrian resisted, clinging to the comfort of believing his sister. But then he remembered the inconsistencies, the exaggerated stories, and the smirk he had once caught on Marissa's face. The truth hit him like a heavy stone. Betrayal had not come from Clara, but from his own blood. rage mixed with sorrow as he realized how deeply he had wronged his wife, and in that moment Adrian knew a reckoning with Marissa was inevitable. The evening was heavy with silence when Adrian finally approached Marissa. She expected another chance to pour her venom, but instead he confronted her with piercing questions. Where had she heard these stories? Who had confirmed them? Why were her words always shadowed by suspicion but never backed by truth? Marissa stammered, her confidence faltering. She tried to weave another tale, but Adrian's eyes no longer carried blind trust. Each excuse she gave sounded weaker, each attempt to shift blame more desperate. For the first time, the mask she had worn so carefully began to crack. Adrian's silence was not approval, it was judgment, and Marissa felt for the first time the weight of her own lies pressing down on her. When Adrian turned back to Clara, his heart was heavy with regret. He confessed his blindness, his failure to protect her, and the cruel distance he had forced upon her because of Marissa's whispers. Clara, though deeply wounded, forgave him with trembling sincerity. But the scars of mistrust were carved too deeply to be erased overnight. The family, too, had witnessed her humiliation and the spread of rumors beyond their walls. Vindication came at a cost. Though the truth was finally surfacing, Clara's dignity had been dragged through the mud. She carried herself with quiet strength, but the pain etched lines of sorrow across her once bright spirit. The same community that once fed on Marissa's gossip now turned against her. As Adrian revealed her deceit to relatives and neighbors, people began to see through her facade. The same whispers she had used as weapons now worked against her, spreading stories of her jealousy and manipulation. Where once she walked proudly, now she endured stares of contempt and muffled laughter. The trust she had squandered could not be regained. Even her closest allies distanced themselves, unwilling to be tainted by her schemes. Marissa's reputation, carefully built over years, crumbled in a matter of days. While Clara and Adrian began the slow process of rebuilding their bond, Marissa's own marriage collapsed under the weight of her actions. Adrian no longer defended her to others, and her husband, Adrian's closest friends too, began to question her integrity. The poison she had brewed for Clara seeped into her own home. Her husband, weary of constant rumors, confrontations, and humiliation, could no longer endure the disgrace. What she had wished upon Clara, loneliness and rejection, fell squarely upon her. The lies she thought would bind her tighter to her family instead severed her most important bond. Marissa sat alone in her once lively home, the silence louder than any accusation. She had destroyed the very trust that held her family together. In her jealousy, she had betrayed not just Clara but herself. Clara and Adrian, though scarred, walked a path of healing together, their love now tempered by trials. The children laughed again, though the shadow of what had happened lingered in the corners of their home, and Marissa, abandoned by whispers that once gave her power, learned the bitter truth. Envy corrodes not just its target but the vessel that carries it. As the final curtain falls on this tale of jealousy and betrayal, remember, every lie carries a cost, and every seed of envy grows thorns sharp enough to wound its planter. If you found this story captivating, don't forget to subscribe for more tales of karma, betrayal, and justice revealed.